Everybody, we're ready to get started. I want to thank all of you for joining today, wherever you are in the world. We're delighted to have you. My name is Jennifer Morse. I'm with MadCap Software, and I'm so excited to welcome Chris Jones today. He is the product content manager at Team Software. So Team Software, for those of you who don't know, is a worldwide leading provider of software solutions for the building service and security industries. And their cloud solutions range from financial, operations, workforce management, time and attendance, and also employee and customer service, customer self-service portals. And so today, Chris is going to share a bit about his journey replacing the learning management system, or LMS for short, that was in place at Team Software with MadCap Flare in an effort to not only reduce costs and complexity, but also deliver exceptional learning experiences for their users, ultimately leading to a significant increase in course views and of course usage in a short time. So welcome, Chris. We're excited to have you today. And as always, since we have a lot to cover, I just want to cover two quick items of business before we jump right in. As a reminder to everybody, we will be recording this session. So if you have to pop out early, not to worry, we'll send you a link to the recording as soon as it's done. And also encourage you to use the question panel in the GoToWebinar console to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to get to what we can at the end. And whatever we can answer, we'll follow up with a question and answer document afterwards. So now that that's wrapped up, I know, Chris, you've got a lot to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and say thanks again for joining us today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jen. Yeah, so as Jen said, my name's Chris Jones. A little bit about me, just so you can kind of know who I am and what I do. So I've been using Flare since version 9, so around 2013, 2014. And then I manage a team which consists of 2 tech writers as well as 2 instructional designers. And so our team is really focused on delivering learning experiences that range from writing release notes all the way to creating learning paths to help clients in the onboarding process or to learn how to use a new product, etc. Really passionate about that. It's what I've kind of wanted to do for a long time, what I went to school for at Iowa State for grad school, so go Cyclones. Yeah, so in the Midwest, working out of Omaha, Nebraska. And I also like to do a little bit of endurance running. So quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Some housekeeping stuff to kind of go over some terminology so that when I say LMS, CMS, we all are on the same page about what we mean by that. And then talk a little bit about what our specific problem was and how we went about solving that problem. And then the bulk of what we'll talk about is I really want to kind of get technical and go into what are the elements in Flare that we're using, how are they helping us solve this problem, and showcase that a little bit, and then obviously leave time for questions and to answer some of those as best I can. All right. So a lot of terms get thrown around: LMS, CMS. You maybe also have heard of a learning experience platform or a component content management system, or CCMS. The important thing here is that an LMS has been historically useful for hosting, primarily for corporate internal trainings, SCORM compliant packages. If you're in the learning industry, SCORM will be meaningful to you. If you're not, it's just a reporting standard for courses, so they're SCORM compliant. If you're kind of on the cutting edge, you may be familiar with something called XAPI or Tin Can API. That's kind of the next stage of that development. And then a CMS, or content management system, really useful for managing website content. So think WordPress. Our corporate website is a WordPress website, for example. And of course, Flare, which is historically useful as a help authoring tool, or HAT. I think they used to call us all propeller heads. I think that was an intentional play on words there. But now really Flare is more than that, right? So it can be used, especially with the introduction of top-down navigation and now the side navigation. You can really create some dynamic things in Flare And so it's kind of changing away just from helping you single source and all of that, but also to really deliver exceptional and engaging content in a way that other programs can't do. Okay, so our problem a little bit, and to go over some context is, first, we kind of had an organizational problem that we needed to solve. Part of what my role was to kind of blend two teams together. So for a little bit of context, at Team Software, we had a group that handles implementation. So we get new clients, we bring them on, they have to be trained on the software, pretty standard practice there. We also had some instructional designers who primarily were responsible for creating e-learning, and then TechCom, of course, doing release notes, writing the help content, and all of those good things. So the problem with that was that our tech writing team for a long time was actually part of our marketing department, and the instructional design team was wrapped in with implementation. So I like to say that part of the problem was that those teams weren't on the same team, and so there was a lot of duplication happening and communication problems, all of these things that happen at all kinds of companies. But then also we were using a learning management system that was clunky and cost prohibitive. And when I say clunky, I mean it just wasn't very flexible to meet the needs of our external audience. And because of that, engagement was really, really low. We were burying all of this content behind a login as well. And that login, of course, because of the licensing structure, each of our clients would get maybe one login that they had to share across their entire organization. And pretty easy to see that that's super problematic for a number of reasons. So we really needed a way to get that content and surface it in a different way. And engaging our LMS provider to help us make that happen was going to cost exorbitant amounts of money. And so we decided we were going to go a different way. And then, of course, just that duplication across teams, really, we wanted to synergize that. And what will be familiar to a lot of you is that we had a non-existent budget to do this in a very small amount of time. So the opposite of it, whatever the opposite of infinity is, that's about how much time we had to do this in. And so what we decided to do was really leverage a tool that we were already comfortable using. The TechCom team had been using Flare for 5 or 6 years at this point. Was something we were comfortable in and knew that could probably do what we wanted with a little bit of creativity and ingenuity on our end. And so that's kind of what we did. And starting, we did make some org changes. And again, this is important for some context, but basically what we did is we combined TechCom and instructional as the learning content team. So I manage that team. And then there's still implementation, but we all fall under the same org of education. And so that really was a way to give some credence to where our priorities were moving forward. So really focusing on those learning experiences for our clients and not just the help content, but all of that and kind of viewing it holistically. And because of that, we really had to create a mission statement that made sense for our team and what we wanted to do. And just going through and doing that was really helpful. If you're on a TechCom team or an education team now and you don't have a mission or you don't have a set of tenets or values that you have documented somewhere, I really recommend going through that process. If you're a manager, you can lead that, or even if you aren't, just internalizing some of this stuff is actually way more helpful than maybe it appears, because it really does remind you of like, okay, this is what we're here to do. And so for my team, we were very cognizant of kind of staying away from the corporate, buzzwordy language, and let's just think about what we really do. So we developed this mission statement that what we do is we create multimedia learning resources that help our clients use our products. So really simple, nothing fancy there. But we really had to start examining all of our content through a lens of a learning experience rather than just maybe a function of support. So I think a lot of times technical content gets lumped into this support role. and it's kind of an afterthought, right? And if you put the first at the forefront of that experience, it really changes the way that you think about how you write, what you write, when you deploy products, et cetera. So that was really helpful. And then just focusing on delivering solutions that keep that in mind. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that we had developed early on, that kind of informed where we wanted to move long term. And so the first thing that we did was develop a course catalog. So our implementation team it sells one-off courses as well as a package of onboarding courses. And one of the feedback that we were consistently getting from our clients was that there wasn't a great way for them to discover what all these courses were, what they could learn in the courses, how long could they expect to be in the course, what did the course look like. And so we set out on a journey to develop this catalog, and it was really the catalyst for everything else that followed. And so I'm going to jump out and show this a little bit, and we'll get out down in the weeds a little more about what's happening in the catalog on the Flare end. So don't worry there, but I do kind of want to show what this looks like. So we have an option here. This is just a PDF that downloads the entire guide as a PDF. But really the power is in, being able to filter. So again, we make accounting software for janitorial and security businesses, and something that they often might have is a fixed asset. So they need to understand how they can depreciate their assets in our program. If you're not an accounting person, I'm not, so that means about as little to me probably as it does to you. But in any case, we have this course, and it's with a trainer, but they can jump out here and they can kind of see, okay, I can expect this to take about an hour. It's with a trainer. Here's what we're going to go over, but I can also get the guide for that course. So one of the things we're doing right now is going through and single sourcing all of our training guides. This one just happens to be done, but we have a lot more to do. That was another fringe benefit of what we were doing, was getting all of those content assets in one place so that we can single source everything in the company. Most of these still live in Word documents, and I know I can't hear people on the other end, but I imagine there's audible gasps. We have thousands of pages of Word documents that we have to still go through and single source. So we're looking forward to completing that work for sure. But maybe I'm more interested in the self-paced element. So I can filter here. And again, I will talk in more detail in a bit about what's happening here and how did we accomplish these elements in the back end and Flare. But these would be all of our e-learnings that we maintain. You can see there's quite a few. So we have a lot of content, and maybe I just want to see, narrow this down more just so it's a little easier to see. So then I can also jump and pop out of here and just view that if I wanted to from here. Again, I can kind of see this course is about 17 minutes, self-paced. So these are all free resources that we give to our clients that are really cool. All right, skip through that here. So you saw this initially when it popped up, but we're kind of in a V1 of what we're calling the Learning Center. And this is what the homepage looks like. And the idea here is that this is something that we really can iterate from, and that was really important. We had gotten in the past kind of buried down into a system that wasn't really friendly for making continual updates, especially as it related to things like brand refreshing and new icons and things like that. We got buried so deep in our CSS files being, way too long and just way too complicated. And so we cleaned all of that up as well, and that was all part of this project. And so here's the LMS piece that I want to talk about. So we had clients that were moving away from a hosted LMS environment where we were sending them out to maybe complete introduction courses before they went into their implementation, or giving people a login if they had a new employee that wanted to be able to go out and access this content. We weren't really tracking any of that stuff on our end, and obviously the client couldn't really track it. And even if we could, because they had to share a login, that data wasn't meaningful. We couldn't reasonably know that if somebody watched a course that it was this person versus another person. And so that became really hard to justify as a benefit of the LMS. Was, oh, well, we can see which users are logging in. We really couldn't. We could see which companies were logging in, um, but that's about it. So we wanted to set something up that gave a similar experience that was familiar, dynamic, but that also offered us data that we could take action on. And so this is kind of what we landed on for our version 1, what we call Team University. Um, and a user can come out here and look at the learning tracks that we've built out. We have way more than this that's coming. We just have to figure out exactly, how we want to handle some of that stuff. But we're constantly developing new things. And again, they can browse all of our courses through that course catalog as well. And so what's really cool about this is if I click on this, I can see all of the courses in this learning track. And maybe I would just want to start at the beginning. And so that's going to pop up. Um, these elements are actually, as you can see, created in Captivate. I've looked at this one before, probably several times. And so it's asking me if I want to jump in where I left off, which is a really cool feature. One of the other problems that we really had to solve was what kind of video elements do we want to live out here? Um, Initially, what we were loading into the LMS for SCORM compliance were actually Flash files, which is a big no-no for a website because most browsers now flag those elements as malicious anyway, and that was confusing people. Uh, but also it's just a dying technology. So we had to also convert all of our courses into HTML5 packages, and that's what we're seeing here. There are some caveats to this. It's much easier if you're deploying something like an MP4 because you have a lot more control over the sizing of what you're looking at, and it's a little more dynamic when you're going into like a mobile view. But the issue that we ran into is we have a lot of interactive elements in our courses that maybe have a client go through and click a few boxes, to demonstrate that they understand what they're looking at, and things like that. You lose all of that if you output to an MP4. So we had to find a way to keep those elements. And so these are HTML5 packages. If folks are interested, I can take that offline about what that looks like and how we handle it on the server side. But at a very high level, this is just actually an iframe that we're loading in that package into. If you're an end user, you'll never know what's happening here. It's kind of seamless. But then off on the left-hand side, something we really didn't want to lose completely from the LMS was the ability to know if you've viewed something before. So have I already gone through and looked at some of these courses? So the way we handled that, imperfect as it is, it does work for us, was to create some visited CSS classes that change the color of these checks. So you'll notice if I click over to this one, it was gray, now it's green. Again, it doesn't uh, explicitly say that I've clicked the play button here or anything like that, but it's generally a pretty good indication that if you're visiting this, you probably are engaging with it. And then we measure the click engagement in Google Analytics so that we can kind of dive deeper into how long are people watching things, what are they doing, etc. And so we leverage that quite a bit. And this was definitely a must-have and something that our clients really like, the ability to do this. And again, I'll get into kind of what all of this is on the back end because I'm sure people are curious for that as well. Okay. And I took all these screenshots in case the internet decided it didn't want to work. So I'm just skipping through stuff I showed there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we accomplished some of this. If you're really Flare savvy, you'll notice that on our home page and our header, uh, we have a top nav approach, but we have some space above the menu that's more like a website header. We had to actually get that loaded in there with some a snippet that's positioned above where that menu loads, and so that's what we're seeing here with all these elements here. So it's really just a snippet um, appended to the header, and then of course in your menu here, it's coming from the master talk with a top-down skin. So that's straight out of Flare, nothing fancy happening there other than just styling it how we wanted it to look. Um, and then the cards on the page, and we'll see several different types of this, and I'll discuss a little bit about some of the decisions we made there. But on the home page, we made these cards with the responsive design editor. Um, there are other ways that we've done it on other pages, including leveraging the foundation CSS framework that Flare uses, as well as using some grid or flexbox to change the display of menu proxies. And we'll see that in a little bit. But there are several different ways you can get effects like this. And for us, it was just about deciding how often are we going to be updating these, how much flexibility do we need in the sizing, etc. So on the home page, we went with the responsive design editor, which is right in Flare, and it really makes it easy to make things mobile friendly um, and gives you some flexibility there. And then the search all, which I'll jump out and show a little bit, is probably the most complicated thing that we had to do because it involves triggering a click event that loads a filter for us. But it's really just fancy CSS and a tiny bit of jQuery that does it all for us. Um, and I should say that I'm not a developer, and no one on my team is a developer, and we did not have the help of a developer doing any of this. So it was kind of our own just ingenuity and grit and just kind of diving in. So I truly believe that anybody can go and create these kinds of elements, and the good thing is that a lot of this stuff you can just take from open source libraries and things like that, and you don't necessarily have to 100% know how to go and write your own JavaScript. You just have to kind of understand what's happening to be able to do some of this, and so that's where we started from. Again, jumping to this Team University home just to show some of what's going on here. We have a separate search proxy that's loading on that. And again, it's using the same script that basically when we click in it, it's going to load a filter so that we're only searching the site for things that are that have a Team University concept. So if I only want to search for courses and I don't want to see any of the other content like help content on the site, it's going to filter those out. And then again, some responsive design editor divs. And then you'll see on the bottom, those cards down there, that's actually a menu proxy. So those are all being controlled through a talk. So when I need to add a new learning track, which we, again, do frequently, I can just load that into the talk and it automatically is there for me. And I don't have to go in and copy a div or do any special CSS to make it look the way I want. It's really just about styling that menu proxy. The way that I've done it is using the grid functionality that is now a part of CSS. Browser support for that's only about 90%. So you can also do the same thing if you're familiar with Flexbox, which browser support for Flexbox is a little better. But I like grid because it's new and fancy and works for, we don't have to support like IE 10 or anything like that. So we don't have some of those same limitations that other folks might have on that. And then again, once we're loaded into a learning track, it's a menu proxy. And this was just it's so easy if we added a new course to this learning track to just drag that topic into the talk, build and publish out, and that new card will show up here um, automatically. And so it's really quick. Anybody on my team can go and do it. There's no special, you don't have to know to go into the XML editor and copy anything and do any fancy stuff like that. It's really just dragging a topic over to the talk. So we love that. And then I did talk a little bit about the visited thing that we did. That's a little more of an advanced CSS that's happening with some font awesome icons to get the check mark. But really at a high level, I'm just saying, if you've been to this link, change the color of this icon to green. It just so happens that you can get that to work with the visited, even though it's not exactly the same as in an LMS where it's actually tracking where you are in the course. And then HTML5 video package there. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about this course catalog because it's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and wanting to get right, and we continue to iterate on, but I also think that some of these fundamentals are really powerful and give a different way of thinking about how you can structure content on your own sites and how you can give that experience to a user in kind of a different way. And so a lot of these elements were taken from some of the resources Flare has available on the Flare forums, as well as in the Slack channel. So if you're not visiting either of those or you're not a member, I encourage you to do that because people post some interesting solutions and scripts and all kinds of things, myself included, out there that you can leverage in different and creative ways. So the first thing here is just really loading in a link to a PDF that's going to show all those courses. So that's pretty simple, and we're just positioning it next to the header. This filter here, which I'm gonna jump out and show a little bit because it's kind of tricky what it's doing, but I'll explain it and you'll see. So if I wanted to jump back to that fixed assets, I can type fixed. And this isn't really searching for anything. So it's not a search proxy. It's not using the Flare search at all. What it's doing is it's filtering out the elements that don't have a header that contains this string. And I have the script for this that I'm happy to share with anybody or make a post on about how to accomplish something like this. But it's really just filtering out that stuff. WinTeam is the name of our core product, so I can search for that, anything I want. And so that's really neat. And then these filters that I showed a little bit, they're actually using conditions. So each of these cards that are loaded in here have a condition or multiple conditions applied to them. And those conditions aren't really conditioning out content in the build process. That's not the function that I wanted them to have. I just needed a way to get some metadata into those elements so that I could write a script to say, essentially, if I select something from that dropdown, anything that doesn't have that condition, just don't show it to me. And then they work together to filter out that content. Now, the way that I did these cards was actually not with the responsive editor. This is where I utilized Foundation Grid. And the main reason for that is just because it's a little easier to copy elements in the XML editor that are Foundation than it is the responsive design editor. And when you're talking about hundreds of elements, it just is a little faster and easier to manage. What you lose by doing it this way is your breakpoints for your mobile and your tablet. You don't really have much control over those. So if you really want to reset, your mobile view to be less pixels before that breaks to mobile view, it's not terribly easy to do that with Foundation, but we didn't have that requirement. if you do, I suggest using that responsive design editor because it's much easier to handle that kind of thing in there. Okay, so I'm actually going to jump out one more time. I know I'm going back and forth here a little bit um, to show one other thing that happens here. So if I'm filtering on multiple things, and let's say I want to do this. If there's nothing that shows up, I just have a little div that displays some text that says, hey, we don't have anything for that. Maybe you could try searching the help articles. And so you could jump out here, or you could do the search all and search for that. So while we're on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how these searches are working. And again, as I said earlier, this is probably the most complicated thing that we've done. And I don't want to lose anybody, so I might say a few things that are confusing, but that's just how we had to do it. So what's happening here is if I click in this help articles search, it's actually selecting this help articles filter here, and it's doing it automatically. And so you can see now, but if I click back up into here, it's going to clear it out for me. And so that's all that's happening. It's basically just selecting and clearing out a search filter when I focus in on that element. And so I can search that same thing here, fixed assets. And you'll notice I'm getting a bunch of help articles. That's what this question mark is indicating here. But if I really just wanted to see what I maybe have for a course for fixed assets, I can jump out there. And here we go. I have a virtual course for year-end procedures for fixed assets. And you'll see the little hat icon indicates that it's Team University there. And I can do this on a number of terms and get the same effect, but that's the general idea of what's happening there. Again, we have a separate page just for help articles that contains links to our release notes and things like that. But the same principles are going on here. And so that's really the experience that we're going for here. Let me jump into some results and then we'll leave some time for some questions for sure. So the way that we're tracking results for this is we have some historical data from our LMS, and we have some historical data as well from Google Analytics on our old, what was our old help site that now is all wrapped into the Learning Center. And so we have some anecdotal evidence. We've heard from clients that they really like this. It's easier to use. They don't have to log in. A manager can send one of their employees to this and doesn't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get logged in or anything like that. But we've also seen, it's not a typo, but we've seen a 1,000% increase in our course views. So if we look at February of 2018 versus February 2019, it's over 10 times the amount of views and engagement there. A big part of that is making it easier for people to access. Another piece of it is just having different and more engaging content as well. Content's obviously important, but we do think that changing the way that we were delivering that content is really what had the most impact here for this and how we handled things. And then there's also some time savings here, right? So we had to integrate instructional designers into our process. And so that took a little bit of time to kind of figure out how we wanted that to work. But once we kind of got rolling, what we recognized is that an instructional designer might start writing a script for a course. And what they're doing is they're going and looking at the help content to help identify what they should be talking about. And so we said, well, why don't we just use the same source of content? And so that's what we've been doing. We're having our instructional designers and tech writers work more closely together in that development process. And sometimes it works the opposite. Sometimes an instructional designer is writing something that we don't have in the help files. And so our tech writers will take a look at the scripts and try to single source that content as best we can as well. Sometimes it's not a one-to-one thing, depending on the audience. We understand that there's going to be some edge cases as well, but by and large, the synergies there have really helped us speed up the process and also just miss less things. The more experts you can kind of have looking at something, the less likely it is that you're going to miss a big thing that went in a release or what have you. And so we take advantage of all of our expertise on our team, and then working with SMEs, we can often have a subject matter expert review a course script and the help content kind of in one go. And so we don't have to bother them 2 or 3 times to look at the same content. And then as I mentioned before, what we're doing now is really moving forward on single sourcing training guide information and keeping a couple of things in mind with that. And what Flare lets us do that an LMS just really doesn't, it is that single sourcing and thinking about, well, maybe if we have a training guide, we can have a facilitator guide. And maybe that facilitator guide is going to have tips and tricks that coaching for, like, hey, remember to breathe or smile or whatever, some nuanced things like that we can include in the guide, but obviously not show to the end user and use conditions to do that. And so we're kind of approaching this process from that perspective as well. And we know, looking back at the edits and the way the process has worked to update these training guides in the past, that getting that stuff single sourced is going to save us hundreds of hours every year that our implementation team was spending editing these documents, making sure they were updated with new stuff and all of that. So we're kind of taking on the scope of that work, which is a lot right now, but we know will save us tons of time in the future. Okay, that's it. So I'm sure there'll be questions.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. We're getting some great questions coming in. Definitely, we're going to turn to these in just a moment. Just want to remind everybody, if you are attending the ATD conference next week, I will be going with some of my colleagues. I'm so excited. We will have a booth there. We hope to see you there if you're going to be going. Please stop by. We're at booth 122. Again, which is in DC next week. And the next thing I want to remind everybody is that we will be in Dublin April 8th through the 11th for our MadWorld conference. So if you haven't signed up, there's still time to save $700 through the 30th of June. So if you haven't registered, I hope you will. It's Dublin's a fantastic city, and if you're, again, kind of on the eastern side of North America, not so much more difficult to get there than here to San Diego. So if you didn't come to San Diego, perhaps you can join us there in Dublin if you haven't already signed up. Lots of great questions that have come in. I think there's certainly a lot of interest in the script that you mentioned. So for everybody who's inquiring, I think what we'll do is we'll probably put that in the, and also some interest in the HTML5 movie package development that you mentioned. So we'll do our best to wrap some of those assets up when we send out the recording and the questions. So thanks everybody for throwing in your 2 cents there. We'll be sure to get those out to everybody that attended. But some really good questions that have come in. When I think the search element really struck a chord with everyone, myself included. So one question that came in, how did you set up the filter? And again, I know it's challenging to go into all the nitty gritty details, but maybe just a little story about how you set up the filters for search by using Flare, or did you use something external for that?
Nope. So that's all done in Flare. I can actually pop into my project here if folks don't mind viewing that a little bit, and kind of showcase what I'm doing there. So I basically, this is a script I'm using that basically controls the functionality of auto selecting the filter, and we can package that up and kind of send that out for people. But in terms of the actual filter content, let me get to a topic here. I apologize. So we were talking about fixed assets the whole time, so we'll stay there. So if I pop out here, you can see I have a couple of concepts that I've applied here. One is fixed assets, the other is help articles. So that's all I'm doing is just applying concepts. So I have either a help, all of our topics either have a help article concept or a Team University concept. And then that's of course how you build the filters out. So those filter sets, which I can show here as well. It's just this. And so really simple, there's nothing crazy fancy going on here other than the script that just auto selects when you are focused in on that particular search proxy. So really it's just saying, if I click in this search proxy, automatically select this filter. And that's what's happening there. So I didn't use any third-party tools or anything like that. You could expand this out, as you might imagine. Maybe you have 15 products and you want them each to have a search proxy that only searches in that product. You could certainly do that. I didn't go that route at this time for the products that we have, but certainly in the future, it's set up to be able to do that. You'd have to add one line for every filter you'd have to add an extra line into that script that says, hey, if it's on this page, make sure you're selecting this filter. But other than that, that's about all you'd have to do to make it more sophisticated or serve more products maybe.
And I may have missed this when you were showing. How did you set
Yeah.
up the clear filters function? Was that part of that script that you showed, or is that
Oh, sure.
another element?
Yeah. So you're talking in these filters here with the catalog.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it was a follow-up to that one. How did you set up that clear filters function? So,
Um, yeah, so it's not clearing the filter. What it's doing is it's this all is just saying if it has any condition on it at all, just show it. So it's kind of it's not clearing it so much as it's applying one that just says if it has any condition on it.
okay.
And that's another uh, script. Again, I can include that. This is actually something, and I'm gonna forget. It was maybe Matt Tregner who had done that. The original purpose was doing like version filtering. And so
Hmm.
I just took that concept and applied it to, instead of versions, I just wanted to filter out the conditions by what module or what product I was looking at. So I actually just took that code straight from a forum post and just tweaked it a little bit for what I needed. So
Yeah, and
um,
I think there's a book that's been written too about that. I think there's a
yeah,
handy
yeah,
resource, and we can provide that to everybody in the assets that we send as well if anyone's interested.
yeah, perfect.
Um, and also to confirm for that search all feature,
Hmm.
you're, are all of the items in your search results, they're in your Flare project, correct? They're not, you're not
Absolutely.
linking to
Yeah.
anything external.
No, there's no external there. So we are using the Flare search engine. We're not using a different search engine. If you wanted to search external stuff, I think you'd probably have to use one of those other search options.
Hmm.
But we have everything that's in the Flare project, so we're able to kind of leverage that, which is much easier to manage than some of the other search engines. So we're
Yeah,
fortunate there.
right. Yeah, but that
I
is an
know, I
option
know
for sure.
I think Flare supports Elasticsearch now. I've used that in the past, and some of that stuff you have to be a little more advanced or have a developer to kind of integrate that with some of that stuff. But yeah, we have everything in Flare.
Yeah, and so this is I thought was an interesting question. Is there a paid element to your courseware, or is everything
No,
available open and free at this time? Are you able to track which of your customers took which courses?
yeah, so it's a great question. We all of our e-learning courses we make available for free at this time. Um, could get into the decision process for that, but those are free. And then any that are with a trainer, there are costs associated with that. And so that's kind of why we have this built here. So if you wanted to request training, this actually would jump out to a bookings site where you could book that training, and it
Hmm.
shows how much things cost as well, with that. But all of the e-learning, so if I'm looking at like any of the self-paced, this is all out there. Anybody could go, I mean, anybody listening in now could go to this URL and watch any of these that they wanted to. In
Okay.
terms of tracking, so we can't, since people aren't logging into this, we can't track down to a user level in that capacity. Although with analytics, we can kind of get there. We know where people are logging in from, and then we know where our clients are in the world. So we can kind of make some educated guesses about who's logging in and where are they coming from, and all of those things. And that data for us, we kind of are more interested in the aggregate. So what are our most popular courses? How long are people engaging with them? We're less interested in who exactly they are, although I definitely see that as a potential important data point for other companies. We just aren't necessarily as interested in that, because we just don't use that granular of data to make decisions on our team.
Okay. So want to kind of switch gears a little bit. There's some great questions coming in about what I call the rubber hitting the road, actual courseware development.
Yeah,
uh,
great.
so yeah, some really good questions. So one was, how do your instructional designers single source their content with yours? Do they use Flare? And a common question that I see kind of folding into this is,
Hmm.
how does that work with SCORM? So that term has, you brought
Yeah.
up at the beginning, and I know that's big in this space. Maybe you can talk a little bit how these things are melding together
Sure.
or
So
not.
for the folks asking about SCORM, you maybe already know that Flare doesn't support SCORM. So what we do is we develop and Captivate. So that's our courseware development tool. You can do the same thing if you're using Articulate or any other number of products. But we output to SCORM, HTML5 and non-SCORM, and we load the non-SCORM files into our Flare environment. And actually, the way that we do that is we host them on our web server. So, and then we reference them, like I said, within an iframe. So those files don't actually live in the Flare project, because what ends up happening is you end up having tons and tons of CSS files and script files that do that. So we load those out externally and reference them, and that's kind of how that's working on the back end. So really, you can just deploy non-SCORM courses, but you can get some of the same reporting details via Google Analytics. And then, of course, at some point, we're looking into, can we write XAPI calls that can capture more data for us within the confines of our learning center? And that would be the element where maybe we would think about putting this behind like a single sign-on, so that if we ever did want to capture actual user data like that we could maybe take advantage of some of the emerging technologies to do that. But really writing anything new and for SCORM right now is not the approach that we wanted to go. But again, we have different needs than other folks, and I understand that. So
Okay, that's great. Interesting question. Have you run into any bandwidth issues when many learners hit your website for e-learning at one time?
no, we haven't. But to give some clarity on this, we average anywhere between 40 and 60,000 page views per month. So and I don't know what other folks maybe are hitting for their sites. So certainly I can't say that wouldn't ever be an issue, but we've never experienced that.
Okay, okay. And I think, a lot of questions are kind of coming up in as people are looking at this, which is interesting. I mean, data is king. So I think everybody's wondering, more about the Google Analytics piece of it. How
Sure.
are you tracking? What are you tracking? And any tips for those of us using Google Analytics in our HTML5
Yeah.
outputs?
Constantly, I mean, we're constantly thinking about new ways that we can capture data. Where we started was because I'll be honest, I didn't come into this knowing a lot about analytics or anything, and kind of had to learn that on the fly. So the where we started was just capturing what pages people were looking at and looking at that aggregate data. Now I have some custom reports that show me What are people searching for? What filters are they using to search? Are they looking in all, or are they using one of the search filters? What are the phrases that they're looking at? And you can get all of that with custom reporting. But then also building out, I guess my recommendation was really think about if you want to capture clicks. So we can capture, like, is somebody coming here and clicking on this? Um, and if so, what do we do with that data is maybe the harder question, but we're capturing things like that. Really interested in seeing what the journey is for our user, where they're entering the site, what they're clicking on, and then how long they're staying and what they're looking at. As I imagine other people are interested in the same thing. But again, we're less interested in who they are in terms of like what client they're from and what their position is at the company at this point. We can see, what language are they viewing the site and all of those kinds of things, and that gives us enough data to make decisions at this point.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit about that XAPI. Will that, if you go down that path, would that enable you to get a little bit more in
I,
terms of detailed results
I think
for
so.
performance?
I can't fully answer that question because I
Still
haven't
kind of
done
new.
it yet, but I think so because you can capture things within an HTML5 non-SCORM. So if someone was in a course, I could get data on what they're doing within that course via XAPI. That's
Mm-hmm.
what we can't do right now. So I can see how long somebody engaged with it because I can see the time that they were on, viewing that, but I can't tell if they clicked in the course and got, and had to redo something or something like that. XAPI would give that, but it's a lot of, you have to write the calls and you have to know what data points you want to see, and we're certainly not there yet. And you also have to do some stuff on the back end with creating a learning record store and having a place to actually put all of that data. So
Mm-hmm.
that's future Chris is gonna tackle that problem. But if anybody else has thoughts or wants to collaborate on that kind of thing, I'm certainly open to that. I think it's gonna be really important in the next few years to understand those things and how you can build out meaningful reports with that data.
Great. I think we have time maybe for one more here. Some folks have interest on how big your project actually is.
Oh,
So if you
sure.
can,
I don't know file size. I think we're somewhere maybe around a gig. But we have 1,500 to 2,000 topics, and then, you know, 8 to 10,000 images. I should have pulled all those stats. I didn't run that, but we're somewhere in that. So it's not giant by any means. I've certainly seen projects that are much, much larger than that. But we're somewhere in that 1,500 to 2,000 topics total.
great. And you mentioned earlier when in the very beginning we were talking about sort of these different terms that we were going to be throwing out today.
Hmm.
Um, a question came in about WordPress. Maybe not you, or I don't know if you're doing this or if there's any talk internally within corporate, but are you able to access any of these things, or this looks pretty blended in with your corporate site, even though it's a Flare generated site.
Hmm.
I suppose if you wanted to, it could blend into the corporate WordPress site, but it doesn't sound
You
like that's the approach that you took.
you could, yeah, and actually that approach is intentional because and the Jen you'll probably know as a marketing person. The marketing people have a vastly different interests in how the corporate site is designed
Hmm.
to drive leads and things like that. And so they intentionally don't want this mixed in with that. Now, could we push content to a different WordPress environment and manage it all in there? Sure, we could do that. I know that other companies do that. It's just not what we just didn't need that. It would be another element
Right.
that somebody would have to learn how to go and use WordPress, and then you'd have to figure out those connectors and
Hmm.
all of that stuff. But certainly it could be done, but
Gotcha.
we wanted to keep them separate.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's makes sense. So we're coming up upon the end of the hour. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I know there's a couple questions that have come in. We're sort of similar to the ones we covered, but if we didn't get to your question, not to worry. As I mentioned, we're going to send out the assets to everybody, including some of the scripts that were talked about today, so that everybody has those to reference and learn from, including Chris's details. So I just want to thank you, Chris, for taking the time to show all this. This was so informative. I learned a lot. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Really interesting take on using Flare. And so we want to just thank everybody again for joining. And just a couple, just last little bit, just to kind of clarify, this is a public URL. And so we can include the link to this site. This is actually linked from our showcase page on our own website. So if anybody's interested in perusing it, it's public, right? Everybody can check it out
Yep,
and take a look at it. And we'll be sure to send that out to everybody.
absolutely.
Yeah, but it's available on the MadCap site. There's a showcase page which has links to lots of externally facing Flare sites. Great for inspiration. So you'll find team software there to kind of check it out, see what you think. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining today. We really appreciate your time and all your amazing questions. We'll be sure to send this out to everyone, and we'll be compiling the Q&A for everybody that registered so that you have all of those things to review. So thanks again, Chris. That was awesome. We really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week, and hope to see you on the next presentation that we're hosting. So thanks everybody. Take care.